process of pastoral care, when I'm working around emotional spiritual support, I'm looking for the spiritual grounding and resource places in a patient and listening to that. And that's all in conversation. That's told through story. People will tell stories about their illness journey. And often in that process, what will happen is they'll have stories of their life will come into that, stories of other times in their life when they faced difficult situations, and in those difficult situations how they emotionally and how they found meaning is what I think I'm trying to say. So how they made sense of those situations. And so it's always about listening to where those stories have appeared in their life and how that marries up against the experience they're having now. And one of the things that are really powerful in this work is that we engage spiritually across many ways of understanding that. And we find that religion is the nurturing component of a person's spirituality. So we're all spiritual first, and then we sometimes have amazing traditions that support that, religious traditions. And that's done basically through listening and through understanding how things match together, how the themes that run through people's stories, the themes that run through their life. And people are very resourced. They've lived their lives very well and had a lot of grounding into who they are as a person in the world, and so they call on all of that. And we listen to that and we respond to that, and that brings people into their own strength and capacities to live it. So the way that we respond to through the listening process is we follow what the person says. So we stay with what they're telling us. We're careful about our own thought processes. So we're very what we work with is actually being aware of our own thought process. So staying in a very reflective mode, staying in a very carrying a lot of skill around awareness. This moment, this time, this idea that this person is presenting as they're telling their story. When we listen, we stay with what the patient is offering to us. And in that offering, what we do see is where they are making sense. We hear those places that they make sense, that give them meaning, where they find their hope. And the hope for some people might be that today that I keep my porridge down, that I don't actually, or the hope that I'll have a sleep this morning and then this afternoon I'll be ready for my visitors. So the hope stays within the bounds of this day usually. Sometimes in the early part of a person's journey, when we're listening to them, we're listening in a different way because they've often got their hope further out into a longer future. Whereas when they've come into the hospice setting and they're really looking at planning their end of life, that's when they start to, today's the day. Today's the day I put my hope around. And so within that space, so we're often listening to that and responding to that. I hear that that's what's happening for you. And, keeping your porridge down is a really good thing. And I know that you've been unwell for the last few days, and that today's the day you're hoping that the medication slips in and works for you. So it's that kind of move that we're doing. A lot of people appreciate and enjoy the process of reminiscing. And to reminisce, what that does is that says my life was worthwhile. I have worth in who I am and who I've been and the people I've loved and the things that I've done in my life. And just to give you a sense of how this reminiscing actually is helpful, because often we think reminiscing is a structured process, but actually it occurs in the conversation and it occurs in the stories that are told to you. So that's the listening that we're doing. And there was a beautiful woman who was a scientist in her life, and so that was a big part of who she was and how she saw herself. And she was struggling a little bit around the existential kind of questions, like who have I been in the world, and is there an afterlife, and how might that look for me? And one day she called me in as I was going past. She said, "Mary, come in here," and she said, "I want to show you something." So she shows me her CV, and it was a very thick CV. It was about that thick. And it was amazing. And she just talked me through her CV. And it was through this process of her telling the stories against her academic achievements, against the documents that she'd written and that were now published, was where she found my life was worthwhile. So it wasn't like she was reminiscing in a structured way, but she made the structure. It was a structure I would never have thought to make and work with her. So the reminiscing is a really powerful place to understand the legacy, because it's what I've done in my past and how I've engaged the world, and what I've left there is in the world, and how people talk reminiscing about how they've changed the world through people, not through what they've achieved in a bigger sense. So they do that, and in that place they begin to tell the relationships that matter, and the relationships that matter now, and how they got shaped themselves by how they engage the world. So it's a beautiful process. The thing that adds into that, I think, is that as we come into a person's life that's now got death in sight, we actually need to understand that they're still living this moment too. So to constantly only be thinking, oh, well, here's what have you done in your life, and what have you achieved, and how good is that, would miss the fact that they are still living, that this is a whole new experience, a whole new place that they find who they are inside of. It's not just about I'm a person who I am now because of what I've done in my life. I'm actually a person because I'm facing this experience, and that's very powerful to be witnessing, to sit alongside of, as a person discovers, actually I'm a person of courage, I'm a person of resilience, and I didn't think I could ever be like this. A big part of our journey is to stay with the idea that they're living here today, rather than that we're going to be thinking about death all the time. And that gives meaning. That gives meaning to the space that they're in. Rather than having a purpose for life anymore that contributes into the bigger picture, what do I contribute here? And it might be to tell the nurse a joke and make her smile. It might be that. And that's a lovely moment to see in somebody, that they felt, and I'll go in later and they'll tell me that story, and it's very beautiful to be part of that. So it's our humanity that tells me about who I am, who that person is spiritually. When I'm engaging with someone around, and they know that I'm the spiritual carer, I've come with that role for them, they will I often will ask them, look, how are you going? That begins the conversation, and they will talk that through. They'll say how they're going, and generally they'll begin by telling me how physically they're going, how the illness story is actually unfolding for them. They'll tell me the story of how they came to be in this place. What the turning point was. This thing happened, and now I'm here. I went to the doctor, and he said this thing, and now this is the journey I've been on. So they'll begin by telling me the illness story. And in that story is where I begin to hear where the resilience sits. We are always resilient. I've never found anybody who's not resilient in some shape or other. So I'll hear that. I'll hear where that resilience sits, and I'll respond to that resilience and say, it sounds like you had a lot of courage as you faced that moment when the doctor said that to you. You found your way through that in some way or other. So they'll tell me those things, and that's what I'll respond to, so that they know I've heard them. Because it's in feeling heard that we actually engage that sense of me and I'm worth something. So, and then the conversation tends to start to have story in it. Story of life, story of who I am, story of the people that they've now mentioned in that story, in that journey. What people teach me is, don't assume anything. Just stay with them in the moment, and they will find their way, and it will be meaningful to them, not to what I think should be meaningful. And they'll find their way, and we're astonishing as people in the world. I just hear that over and over and over. that people will surprise you and find their way, find their way. And having an advanced care plan actually has the conversation bubbling away in them. They don't have to continue to think about it, but what it does is it sets up their own patterns of reflection, their own inner reflection processes. And I think that's the power of it. More than that they tick some boxes or write something particular, but that somehow it prepares the place within them as they come into this final part of their life. And they have some autonomy in it that allows them to have some autonomy in that place. Rather than life's just happening to them, they have a sense of being in the life that's happening to them.